The moment his fingers almost touched my face, I forgot the sound of my husband's voice. There was only the heat between us, the echo of memories I didn't even know I carried, and the haunting scent of cedar and something older, like regret in cologne form. He said, "I knew your mother, more than you realize." And just like that, everything I believed about loyalty marriage and my past cracked wide open. You can't imagine what happened next. Welcome to Vows and Betrayals, where we share stories that make you feel remember and rethink everything. If you've ever stood quietly in a crowded room and still felt alone, leave a single heart in the comments. You are seen. To those of you who've been listening to the stories on this channel, thank you. Your support means more than you know. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they end. Now, let's begin. The night was colder than I expected, even for Charleston in December. The old hotel looked like something pulled out of a southern postcard, wrought iron balconies, magnolia trees, wrapped in string lights, and that faint scent of jasmine that always clings to the low country air, even in winter. Martin squeezed my hand as we walked in, his smile too wide, too practiced. He'd been rehearsing his charm all week for this company gala. This was more than a party. It was a chance for him to impress the executives, to prove he belonged. And I was part of the package, the supportive wife, polished, pleasant, invisible. I'd chosen a dark emerald dress, not flashy, but flattering. My hair pinned up pearl earrings from my mother's jewelry box, and a touch of red lipstick I hadn't worn in years. When Martin saw me earlier that evening, he said, "You look perfect," then went back to checking his watch. Inside the ballroom, everything shimmered, crystal chandeliers, live piano music, laughter bubbling like champagne. People were already networking glasses, clinking small talk, flowing in well-practiced rhythms. I moved through the room on autopilot, offering tight smiles, nodding at introductions. There was a rhythm to these things, and I'd learned the steps long ago. Wives smiled, husbands bragged, and no one asked too many questions. Then I saw him. He wasn't announced. He didn't need to be. The room simply adjusted itself around him. Julian Cross, tall, poised, deep brown skin like polished mahogany under the warm lighting, gray at his temples, suit tailored like it was sewn directly onto him, and eyes, God, those eyes, steady, observant, with a weight behind them that made you feel like you were being measured and remembered. Martin stiffened when Julian approached. "Mr. Cross," he said too quickly, "this is my wife, Theresa." Julian looked at me like I wasn't just someone's wife. His voice was smooth, low. "Theresa," he said, as if trying the name on his tongue. "It's good to finally meet you." And there was something in the way he said it, like we'd already met. He didn't shake my hand. Instead, he took it gently, in his own warm, steady, and held it just long enough for me to wonder if time had slowed down. There was nothing rushed, nothing inappropriate, but there was something aware, like he was reading more than just the curve of my fingers. "Theresa," he said again, softer this time. Then he paused, studied my face like he was searching for something he'd once lost. "You remind me of someone," he said, voice low, almost thoughtful. "Someone who changed my life, without even knowing it." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My throat felt dry, and not because of the champagne I hadn't touched. Julian's eyes didn't leave mine. They weren't flirtatious. They were remembering, deep, reflective, like he wasn't seeing me exactly, but through me. Martin laughed awkwardly, pulling slightly on my arm. Well, she is unforgettable, he said. Been putting up with me for over 20 years now. Julian smiled politely, but it was clear his focus hadn't shifted. Is that so, he said, then turned back to me. 20 years. That's rare these days. There was a weight in how he said it, like he understood what staying meant. Like he knew that time doesn't just pass, it wears on you gently and relentlessly. A waiter passed with a tray of wine. Julian waved one away, then nodded toward the hallway behind us. I hope you're enjoying the evening, he said to me, lowering his voice just slightly. These events can be polished, but not always personal. He was right. Every detail of the night felt staged, from the perfect lighting to the curated conversations. But in that moment, his words felt like the only real thing in the room. I managed a polite nod. It's a beautiful venue. He smiled again, barely there, but enough to send a flicker down my spine. If you find it too much, he said, there's a quiet lounge down the hall. Some of us sneak away there when the networking gets too loud. It was an offer, not a command. A door cracked open, not pushed. I'll keep that in mind, I said carefully. Then, without another word, he nodded to Martin and walked away, measured calm, like nothing had happened. But something had happened. And as I stood there, smile frozen in place, heart ticking a little too fast, I realized, for the first time in years, I'd just been seen. I needed a moment to breathe. The room was getting louder, the air thicker. Martin had been pulled into a conversation about investment portfolios, and I excused myself with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I wandered down the hallway Julian had mentioned, not expecting to find anything. And yet maybe I was hoping to. At the end of the hall, a heavy door stood slightly ajar. A soft amber light spilled from within. Curious and tired, I nudged it open. It was a quiet lounge, cozy, elegant. Leather chairs, dark wood shelves, old portraits in thick frames, and on the far side a desk, neat, ordered. One photo sitting alone. I stepped closer. It was an old black and white photograph. Slightly faded, the corners soft from time. In it, my mother stood smiling barefoot in a summer dress, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of a younger man. I stared at the man beside her. He looked like Julian, but younger. No gray at the temples. No tailored suit. Just a soft button-down shirt and eyes that already held too much silence. My breath caught. Flipping the photo carefully, I read the writing on the back. To James, always, M. James. I turned it over again, as if the image might change. That smile, that closeness. I hadn't seen that photo before, not in my mother's albums, not in our home. Why was it here? And who was James? Was Julian once called James? Or was this someone else entirely? My chest tightened, questions tumbling too fast to catch. Suddenly the air felt too still. I placed the photo back exactly where it was stepped away. Slowly, heart hammering louder than the jazz playing faintly from the ballroom. Somewhere down the hall, laughter erupted. I didn't move. I just stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, knowing I'd just opened something I couldn't easily close. I returned to the main hall, trying to look like nothing had changed. But inside, something had shifted. The photograph clung to the edges of my mind, like fog on glass. My mother's eyes. The handwriting. James. Martin was still talking, lost in numbers and networking. I needed a drink. At the bar, I stood quietly, trying to still the pounding in my chest. A woman beside me reached for a glass of red wine. She looked to be in her 60s, maybe older. Elegant, but worn like someone who had once dazzled a room, but no longer needed to. She caught me staring at nothing and gave a small smile. "First time at one of these things?" she asked. I nodded. "You?" She chuckled. "Too many times. My late husband worked here for 30 years. We stood in silence for a moment. Then softly she added, "Be careful around Julian Cross." I turned to her surprised. "Excuse me." Her eyes lined with years, and something heavier met mine without blinking. "You're not the first," she said gently. "He notices women who carry silence, the kind who've been holding in too much for too long. And when he looks at you, you feel seen, don't you?" I didn't answer. She sipped her wine, her voice just above a whisper now. "But he doesn't always leave people whole." Something in me bristled, half disbelief, half dread. I wanted to ask more, but she'd already turned away, moving slowly into the crowd. Just like that, she was gone. I stood there, the glass cold in my hand. The room was exactly the same, but now it felt sharper, less safe, like the lighting had changed, but only for me. I looked across the hall. Julian was talking to a group of investors, his expression calm, almost amused. Nothing about him looked dangerous, but danger doesn't always arrive shouting. Sometimes it speaks softly. Sometimes it smiles. And I foolishly, maybe, was still listening. The terrace was quiet. A soft wind moved through the trees below, carrying the scent of salt from the harbor. The air felt cooler up there, clearer, like it had been waiting for someone to come breathe it in. I leaned on the railing, trying to still the storm in my chest. The door opened behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was him. Julian stepped beside me, not too close, just enough to make the silence between us feel full. Sometimes, he said, these events make me feel like a ghost in my own life. I glanced at him. He was looking out, over the city lights, his expression unreadable. I used to think success would feel like something, like a moment, a summit. But it doesn't. Not really. It just keeps moving. Always one step further, one notch higher. I nodded, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "I gave up a scholarship," once I said, quietly. "Music. Piano. I thought I'd come back to it someday." He looked at me then. "But you didn't." I shook my head. "Life got busy. Martin's job moved us around. We had kids. Bills." He smiled softly. "And you were the glue." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was knowing. Two people who had given up parts of themselves for different reasons and were only now beginning to grieve what they'd lost. He turned slightly toward me. There was someone, he said, a long time ago. She was brilliant, sharp, warm. She made the world feel like it was opening up. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. She was married. He continued, and so was I eventually. But before that we had one night. Just one. I swallowed hard. He smiled faintly, as if seeing it again. Under the stars. On a roof. Not unlike this. It wasn't physical. Nothing like that. We just talked. For hours. And when she left, she kissed me on the cheek and said, "That's all this can be." He paused, his voice turning quieter. And it was. I turned toward him. "Did you ever tell her how you felt?" He shook his head. We spent the rest of our lives pretending we never had that night. He looked at me, then truly looked. And I never stopped regretting it. The ballroom was nearly empty when I came back down. The music had softened to background notes, just enough to fill the space without asking for attention. Most of the guests had filtered out some lingering near the bar, or clustered in final goodbyes. I thought I'd just slip back in, find Martin, and head home. But then I saw Julian, alone, by the window. He was loosening his tie, the first sign all night that he was human, not carved from composure. The sharp edges had faded. There was something undone in him, something that matched the unraveling inside me. Our eyes met. He didn't move. Neither did I. I walked toward him slowly, unsure if it was gravity or choice. "Did you find your quiet moment?" he asked, voice low. "I did," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And then I lost it. He smiled faintly. "That happens." We stood there, just breathing. He looked at me like I was the only person left in the room, like he could still see that younger version of me, the one I'd left behind for bills calendars and practicality. His hand lifted slightly, as if reaching for mine, or maybe for my face. But it stopped midair. Hesitated. I didn't move. Not forward. Not away. The moment stretched full of possibility and weight and ache. I don't know how long we stood like that, but something inside me whispered, no. Not out of fear, not because of guilt, but because I knew what this was. It wasn't love, it wasn't lust. It was a recognition of paths not taken, of parts of ourselves we'd buried too deep, of what it feels like to be truly seen and not need to be touched to feel it. His hand dropped slowly back to his side. He looked away first, then back. "You're extraordinary, Theresa," he said softly. I smiled. It was small, but real. "I should go," I said. He nodded. "Thank you," I added. "For what?" "For reminding me that I still exist." He didn't answer. He just watched as I turned and walked away. And even as I moved farther, I carried the echo of that almost touch, like a heartbeat I didn't know I'd been missing. Back in the hotel room, everything felt still. Martin was already asleep, one arm flung across the bed, his dress shoes kicked off haphazardly near the nightstand. The hum of the city below filtered in through the cracked window, blending with the distant echo of waves. I slipped off my heels and sat on the edge of the bed, unsure what I was feeling. Not regret, not longing. Something quieter, like standing at the edge of something old, and not needing to fall in. As I reached for my purse to take out my earrings, I felt it. A folded piece of paper. Small, crisp, tucked into a side pocket I hadn't opened all night. I hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "You are not just beautiful. You are brave. Don't lose yourself. The way your mother did." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until it left me. The weight of it hit softly, like a wave that doesn't crash but pulls. I sat there for a long while. Then I reached into the drawer and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Old, dusty, the one I hadn't opened in over 10 years. It still smelled faintly of cedar and paper and the girl I used to be. On the first blank page I wrote, "I am still here," and it was enough. I left the journal open on the nightstand beside Martin's sleeping form. Then I walked to the window. Charleston was starting to stir streetlights, dimming the first colors of morning brushing the sky. I pressed my hand against the glass, not to lean, just to feel. A tear slipped down my cheek. Just one. But for the first time in years, it wasn't from sadness. Some connections come to change our direction. Others, to remind us not to stray. Julian wasn't a detour. He was a mirror. And what I saw reflected wasn't him. It was the part of me I'd forgotten still existed. We spend so much of our lives becoming everything to everyone else, the wife, the mother, the helper, the peacemaker, that we stop asking, "Who am I?" when no one needs me. This isn't a story about infidelity. It's about identity. About reclaiming the self you gave away piece by piece until one quiet night someone reminds you you are still here. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever buried a dream or stood in a room and realized you didn't recognize your own voice anymore, write something tonight. Anything. Even just one sentence that says, "I still matter," because you do. Welcome to Vows and Betrayals, where we tell stories that don't just entertain, but awaken something in you. If this story spoke to you, leave a dot in the comments. And if you've ever stood at the edge of a moment that could have changed everything, we'd love to hear what you chose. To all our returning listeners, thank you for walking these journeys with us. And to our new ones, welcome. Make sure to subscribe, because sometimes the right story finds you at exactly the right time.